Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my September wrap-up, which is also my wrap-up for the Magical Readathon. I was really excited to participate in the Magical Readathon in September because I loved the previous editions and I was looking forward even more to the new version that G from Book Roast introduced to us in August, I think. I loved seeing how everyone was so hyped about this readathon and was so excited for it, me included, and I would just want to say once again, as I did in my TBR video, that this readathon is above and beyond anything I've ever seen in a readathon. I loved it and I cannot wait for the next installment in April. For the readathon we basically had to follow a path. We went on a journey from the novice path, passing a couple of different locations and ending up at the Aurelium Academy Arc, so that we are able to attend Aurelium Academy, which is a magical academy, during the readathon in April. If you want to know more about this, I suggest watching G's video. I'll leave it in the description down below. But even though there are 7 locations with a reading prompt connected to each one, G specified that we only had to read 2 books to pass this first journey and this first readathon. So that took off the pressure a little bit for me because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to read 7 books, and in the end I didn't read 7 books. I ended up reading 6 books and not being able to get to the last book on my TBR, but that is fine because, like I said, 2 books was enough for this readathon. But in this wrap-up I'm just going to quickly tell you what prompt I read the book for and just give you my short review, as always. And because of that, I'm also for the first time not going through the books chronologically as I read them, but I'm just going through them following the journey of the novice path. So the first prompt was for the novice path entrance, and the prompt for that was to read a book with a map. And for that I read The Name of the Rose by Umberto. This was the most intimidating book on my TBR for this year. It was also one of the books on my 10 books I have to read before the end of 2021 list. And it has a map. It's a map of a monastery, of an abbey to be specific. So a small map, but definitely a map. This has been on my TBR for a very long time and I'm very glad that I have now finally read it and that I really loved it. This book is set in 1327 in an abbey, and we follow a young novice who relates this history of bizarre events at a much later date, late in his life, in his 70s or 80s, I don't know. So he looks back on this time in his life as he travels with brother William of Baskerville. They travel to an Italian abbey, and when they get there, they find out that a death has occurred and William of Baskerville is asked to investigate that death. But things go from strange to stranger because more people die as the days progress. In the meantime, there's this big political and religious conflict going on as well that William has to attend to as well. It's set to the backdrop of medieval political and religious unrest and conflict, and it's really interesting to read about that because that all happened even if this didn't. And as I started reading this novel, which is a modern classic and which has sold millions and millions of copies, I was prepared for lots of difficult language, lots of complex concepts that I would have a hard time wrapping my head around. But even though it was difficult at times, it still read quite quickly. There is this mystery at the heart of it, even if there is lots of other things going on, that makes it an exciting read and you want to know what is going on, who is killing these people. And I already started reading this in July, I think, but I read the first 100 pages, 120 pages over July and August, and then I went on holiday with my parents in September and I read the rest there. And it was just so much fun and so nice to be able to devote all that time to it on holiday. So it was the perfect time and place to read it. And I'm glad I've now finally read it. The next stop on the journey is the Ashthorn Tree, and the prompt for that is to read a book that keeps tempting you, or a book that is at the top of your TBR. And for that I read Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. This was on my TBR for a readathon that I participated in earlier in the year. I don't even remember when. I think it was July. But I didn't get around to it then, so it was definitely on the top of my TBR and it did also keep tempting me. So I read it in September and I really enjoyed this. This is a magical realism novel that's also part memoir, and the main character is Echo Brown. She lives in Cleveland on the east side, where apartments are small and where people have lots of money problems and drug problems, as is described in the synopsis at the start. And Echo is a wizard. She finds out about that because her mother is a wizard as well. They are able to slow time and they are able to perform miracles. And this book is divided into chapters according to the lessons that Echo learns about life and about being a wizard. It definitely also reads like a contemporary novel because it is also about Echo's normal life, I guess you could call it. She goes through some really tough things. Her mother is addicted to drugs and her younger brothers are also potentially choosing a path in life that will not lead them to very happy things. So Echo lives a hard life, but she finds happy things even when very bad things happen to her. I read this at the start of the month, so it's been a while, and I don't really have many of the details clear. I just remember that I absolutely loved it. I thought the writing style was absolutely beautiful, and even though it's told through these lessons that Echo learns as a wizard, these lessons are lessons that we all need to learn, that we all learn as we grow up. It's basically all just a metaphor for life, I think, and I really enjoyed that. This made me feel all the things. I got quite emotional at some parts in the story because it's just so raw and heartfelt, and I loved it. Next up we get to The Mist of Solitude, and the prompt for that was to read a standalone, and for that I read A Symmetry by Lisa Halliday. This is another book that's on my list of 10 books to read before the end of 2021. This was actually a gift from my parents-in-law a couple of years ago, and when they gifted it to me I'd never heard of it before, even though this was an absolute literary sensation. I just apparently hadn't crossed paths with it before, but this is a story divided into a couple of different parts. The first part is about Alice, who is a young writer, and she lives in New York and she meets Ezra Blazer, who is a very famous writer who is kind of just waiting to win the Nobel Prize. To give you an idea of his fame, she begins an affair with him. I'm not sure if they really fall in love, but they have an interesting relationship with a power dynamic that's definitely a little bit icky. You follow them for a while, and then the second part of the book is about Amar, who is an economist en route to Kurdistan, and he is held up at customs on Heathrow Airport, and we follow him during the hours that he is stuck there, and we also get flashbacks from his life up until that point. And then there is another part which is much shorter, and these parts are all connected somehow, which is not something that I really realized while reading this, and because of that I thought this book was a bit incoherent and I didn't really enjoy it because of that. The first part about Alice and Ezra I really enjoyed, also because I knew a bit about the backstory. Alice is definitely modeled after Lisa Halliday herself, and Ezra Blazer is definitely modeled after Philip Roth, who was a very famous writer who Lisa Halliday had a relationship with when she was a lot younger and he was very old already. So that was an interesting context to know about while reading this book, but then the second part about Amar just had me very confused because I didn't know how this fit in within the story, and then the third part just felt kind of redundant. I didn't really need that part in the story. I didn't really understand why it was there. I did understand more about that as I was reading analyses and reviews about the book after finishing it, but for me, I don't know if it's just because I didn't grasp the details or what it was, but I just didn't catch the subtleties that made it clear how these novels were connected or how these parts were connected. And because of that, I just didn't really enjoy it. I was a bit confused by it. I was a bit bored while reading it, I have to be honest. So even though this is very beautifully written and has some very interesting philosophical ideas or ideas about writing as well, overall I was just a bit disappointed by it. Next up we've got Ruin of the Sky. Read a book featuring ghosts, a haunted house or other supernatural elements. And for that I read a story by H.P. Lovecraft out of this collection, The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories. I read the story called The Hunter of the Dark. I chose that story specifically because I needed to read a book or a story with the word dark in it for the buzzword reading challenge. I forgot the name there for a second. So I read The Hunter of the Dark, which was a very short story. It is actually the very last story that H.P. Lovecraft ever wrote or ever published, I think. And it was fine. I wasn't blown away by it. I've kind of forgotten it mostly already. It definitely wasn't as scary or as terrifying as I had hoped it would be and had thought it would be based on everything I've heard about H.P. Lovecraft stories. I think it was meant to be scary, but maybe it's just because it was old, or maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset, but it wasn't just really that scary. It was a fine read, it was written alright, lots of adjectives, but I didn't really feel anything for the main character, and the mystery itself, or the scary thing in the dark, wasn't that scary either. I can't really even remember what it was exactly. The story was only about 20 pages, and it was fun to finally have read something by H.P. Lovecraft, but I don't really feel the need to read anything else by him in the foreseeable future. So yeah, it was fine, and that's it. Then we get to Obsidian Falls, and the prompt for that is to read a mystery or a thriller book, and for that I read an Agatha Christie novel. I read the second of the Poirot mysteries, and it was The Murder on the Links. This story is set in France, which was fun because I read a part of it while I was in France on holiday. And Poirot and Hastings, I think he's called, Hastings is the narrator of the story. They are called to France by a man who thinks his life is in danger, and he asks them to come to help them solve this mystery, this problem, but he doesn't relate to them what this problem is, and by the time they get to France he has already been murdered, and they find him on a golf course, hence the title of the book, Murder on the Links. This whole mystery is unraveled and other characters come and go, and it was just a fun read. I definitely don't think it was amazing. It also isn't one of Christie's most famous novels, but I have vowed to read all of the Poirot books in chronological order. So it was fun to read, and I'm definitely excited to move on to the other books, the more famous ones. I didn't think the mystery was all that special, but it was definitely a fun read, like I said. I don't really have that much to say about it. I love Agatha Christie's writing style. It's a really fast read. They're also very short, so it's fun to read them in between other things. And then we get to the Tower of Rumination, and the prompt is to read a 5-star prediction. And for that I read The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I'm pleased to say that my prediction was right. I absolutely adored this book. This is one of my favorite books I've read so far this year. I think it's up there in the top 2 or 3. So yeah, definitely a success. This book is about George, who is a very mild and unremarkable man who just goes through life not wanting to do any harm, just living his normal life. But he has one very remarkable thing about him, and that is the fact that he can change the world, he can change reality through his dreams. And at the start of the book there's a situation that forces George to go into therapy with a doctor called William Haber, and he tells Haber about his condition, and Haber doesn't really believe him because of course this is a very strange thing to be able to do. But soon Haber finds out that it is true, and he decides to exploit this special ability of George. Because they live in kind of a dystopian world. This was written in the 1970s, and I think this was meant as kind of a futuristic novel, a novel that shows us where we might end up if we continue treating the climate the way we do and things like that. I'm not sure what year this is supposed to be set in, but it's definitely kind of scary what has happened. So Haber decides he wants to change things for the better, but of course this power kind of goes to his head and things happen, situations escalate, and George is kind of stuck in this situation that he doesn't want to be in. And some of you might know that I love sci-fi and that I love stories about dreams. And this is both. So I had very high hopes for it, and like I said, I adored it. One of the things I loved most about this book is that you get to see the story from both the perspective of George as well as from Dr. Haber, so protagonist and antagonist. That was very interesting. It's mostly a psychological novel because of that as well. You get to see their thought processes and see why they make the decisions that they make. And at the same time there's this really cool sci-fi thing going on about worlds that keep changing because of George's dreams. And I love that. If you love sci-fi, if you love stories about dreams, if you love psychological novels, I'd highly recommend picking this up because it was so cool. This was also my very first Ursula K. Le Guin novel, so I'm definitely planning on picking up more by her in the future. And like I said at the start, I didn't get to the final book of the readathon, which was at Aurelium Arc Academy and which was to read a book with a school setting. I had picked out Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend for that, the third book in the Nevermore series, but it was over 500 pages and I had only a day or so left, so that just didn't happen. So I'll read that later on this year, hopefully. But those were all the books I read in September. I hope you enjoyed this video. In a comment please let me know what was your favorite book of September. Mine was definitely The Lathe of Heaven, clearly. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future, and have a wonderful day. Bye!